The Forrester mansion was decked in white roses, candles flickering under chandeliers, champagne chilled and ready. Guests were arriving. The press had caught wind of what was meant to be the ultimate union: Ridge Forrester and Dr. Taylor Hayes, finally sealing decades of history with vows under the Forrester crest. For once, it seemed like Taylor was getting her happy ending. The children were united, the family appeared aligned, and Brooke Logan, for once, was not center stage. But then Ridge hesitated, and everything cracked. Minutes before the ceremony, Ridge pulled Taylor aside. His voice was low, uncertain, and full of weight. He didn't say he didn't love her. He didn't say he regretted the life they had shared. But he said the one thing that ended it all. "I can't marry you." For a moment, time froze. Everyone expected Taylor to break, to cry, to plead, to collapse under the weight of yet another betrayal from the man she had always put first. But she didn't. Not this time. Instead, Taylor straightened her spine, adjusted the neckline of her gown, walked out to the guests, and in a clear, deliberate voice said, "The wedding is off." But the story isn't over. From that moment forward, Taylor Hayes wasn't just the woman left at the altar. She became the architect of a public reckoning. Within 24 hours, photos of Ridge looking shell-shocked in his tuxedo were splashed across tabloid covers. "Cold feet for Forrester," screamed one. "Taylor abandoned again," said another. But Taylor wasn't hiding. She wasn't grieving. She was working. Swiftly, strategically, and unapologetically. Her first move was reclaiming the narrative. Instead of dodging the media, she leaned in. A press release from her foundation framed the failed wedding as a private pivot and highlighted Taylor's commitment to emotional truth and transparency in relationships. She did a brief appearance at a charity event the next day solo, radiant and firm, where she emphasized the importance of knowing when to walk away from patterns that no longer serve you. But behind the grace, Taylor had declared war. She launched a direct campaign not just against Ridge, but against the institution that had allowed Brooke Logan to hold disproportionate sway over the Forrester empire. For years, she'd watched as her professional achievements were downplayed, her presence minimized, and her integrity questioned, all in the name of love triangles and fragile male egos. Now, she was done playing nice. She began with the Forrester board. Using her influence as a public figure, she met privately with Thomas and Steffi, who were both still reeling from their father's last-minute betrayal. "This isn't just about me," she told them. "It's about the kind of company we're tied to. If personal manipulation keeps driving professional decisions, then what future is there for either of you?" They listened. And when Taylor pointed out how Ridge's refusal to be honest about his reasons was damaging not just her, but them, they didn't argue. Steffi, protective of her mother and disgusted by her father's indecision, agreed to discreetly push for an internal review of executive influence at Forrester Creations. Thomas, desperate for redemption and eager to distance himself from the toxic cycles of the past, aligned behind her as well. For once, the fractured family unit stood behind Taylor, not Ridge. Her next move, the public narrative. She worked her contacts at the Psychology Institute, many of whom owed their careers to her mentoring and advocacy. A whisper campaign started to spread in professional circles. Taylor Hayes, esteemed psychiatrist and humanitarian, had been systematically undermined by the Forrester machine. Editorials followed. Blog posts from women's networks popped up overnight, asking why a woman like Taylor was always positioned as the runner-up in her own life story. A popular podcaster called her the most misused professional in LA. The hashtag Team Taylor began trending. People were watching. The pressure was building. And Ridge. He was cornered. His silence had once been a tool as shield. But now, his refusal to publicly explain why he had walked away from the wedding was becoming its own scandal. Taylor had maneuvered the narrative so well that people began assuming the worst. That he had cheated again. That Brooke had interfered. That Ridge had humiliated Taylor on the most important day of her life for no good reason. He avoided the press. He avoided his children. But he couldn't avoid the truth. It all came to a head during a private family dinner intended to ease tensions. Eric, trying to maintain dignity amid public embarrassment, invited Ridge, Taylor, Steffi, Thomas, and even Brooke to the table. What he got was a battlefield. Taylor didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. But she said, clearly and publicly, "If you're not going to tell them the real reason, I will." Ridge said nothing. Steffi leaned in. "Dad, is it Mom you didn't want? Or was it that you couldn't let go of Brooke?" Still, he said nothing. Thomas looked visibly ill. "Say it," he demanded. "Just say what we already know." Brooke, sitting stiffly at the end of the table, said nothing either. Her face betrayed nothing but her eyes flicked toward Ridge. And then Taylor dropped the final blow. "I told him I wouldn't let him walk away without being accountable. And I still won't." The implication landed with force. Ridge hadn't left because of love. He had left because he was a coward. Because he wanted both women to keep orbiting around him while he stayed at the center. The silence after that was deafening. The next day, the Chronicle ran an op-ed titled "The Cost of Silence: Why Ridge Forrester Owes Us an Answer." By then, even loyal Forrester shareholders were calling for a clear public statement. Internal communications leaked showing tension at the top levels of the company. Designers were unhappy. Marketing wanted distance. Hope Logan canceled a campaign launch, citing personal family instability. Every move Taylor made pushed Ridge closer to the edge. It all built toward one inevitable moment. In a hastily arranged press conference meant to clarify personal developments, Ridge stood behind a podium and finally told the truth. "I walked away from the wedding because I couldn't lie anymore. I wasn't ready. And the truth is I still had unresolved feelings. Feelings I should have confronted long before that day." He didn't say Brooke's name. He didn't have to. The backlash was swift. The public didn't see a romantic man torn between two loves. They saw a grown man incapable of honesty, who had humiliated a respected woman in public, and was now trying to dodge the consequences. Taylor's campaign didn't slow down. She used the momentum to launch a new initiative focused on professional women reclaiming narrative control in male-dominated industries. She was invited to speak at 2 universities. A new book deal was rumored. She was no longer framed as the scorned ex, she was the face of a movement. And Forrester Creations was forced to announce an internal ethics and governance review. They implemented new protocols for transparency in leadership decisions, especially where family and romantic relationships overlapped with company interests. It was a small but public admission that Taylor had been right all along. Ridge remained on the board, but his influence was diminished. Brooke stayed quiet, retreating from public life for the first time in years. Steffi and Thomas, quietly, took more control of the family business, not with vengeance, but with focus. They were determined to build something less tangled in ego, in betrayal, in cycles that never ended. And Taylor. She never got the wedding, but she got something more powerful. Her dignity, her platform, her voice. And for the first time in decades, she wasn't standing in the shadow of Ridge Forrester. She had become her own force, and the entire city of Los Angeles had no choice but to watch. The tension inside Forrester Creations had never been higher, but it didn't start with business. It started with betrayal. When Ridge Forrester publicly backed away from his wedding to Taylor Hayes, he didn't just shatter a woman's heart, triggered a chain reaction that would threaten the future of the entire Forrester empire. And the first explosion came from the one person no one expected to challenge Ridge so directly, Thomas Forrester. To the public, Ridge's cold feet confession was framed as confusion, as the burden of complicated love. But to Thomas, it was something else entirely. It was humiliation. It was betrayal. It was the final, unforgivable act of emotional cowardice from a man who had played both sides for too long. Thomas had watched his mother stand tall after Ridge's abandonment, watched her turn heartbreak into strategy, spin personal pain into public power. But inside, something in Thomas had snapped. Not with grief, with rage. Because to him, Taylor wasn't just Ridge's ex. She was a symbol of everything the Forresters had claimed to value: loyalty, grace, resilience. And she'd been discarded again, humiliated in front of their family, the industry, the press. Thomas couldn't unsee it. He didn't confront Rich directly at first. He didn't scream. He didn't plead. Instead, he went to work. Without warning, Thomas issued a hold on all approvals for Brooke Logan associated design lines, including the two biggest, Brooke's Bedroom and the Brooke Logan Signature Series, both of which were key revenue drivers in Europe and South Korea. His reason? Creative stagnation, but his real motive was revenge. At first, the executive team thought it was a miscommunication. Then it snowballed. Production paused. Overseas buyers grew nervous. Distributors panicked. Rich called for an emergency board meeting. Thomas didn't flinch. He stood in the center of the conference room, cold, precise, unapologetic. If the woman who undermined my mother's dignity gets to have creative influence, then I don't want my name attached to this company, he said. Rich's jaw clenched. That woman is still your stepmother. Thomas stared him down. And my mother was supposed to be your wife. It wasn't business anymore. It was war. Brooke was livid. She stormed into the office, demanding answers, accusing Thomas of sabotage, of using the company to settle personal scores. But Thomas held his ground. You got what you wanted, he said coolly. Rich chose you. But you don't get to win at the cost of my mother's worth. Not again. Then he dropped a real threat. I'm launching a new design wave, he said in front of the full board. It's a creative overhaul built around the legacy and innovation of the Tridge era. Not Ridge and Brooke. Not whatever this is now. The Tridge legacy was the golden age of Forester design, and I'm proving it. He announced an internal movement to design revolution, a complete reset of Forester's creative direction. New silhouettes, bold colors, themes rooted in power, resilience, and reinvention. He didn't wait for approval. He called in Zende, recruited Ivy on digital visuals, and even reached out to international collaborators previously sidelined. Within 2 weeks, Thomas's team was already generating prototypes, storyboards, and press teasers. Whispers spread fast that Forrester's next fashion week would be unlike anything before. But it came at a cost. Internally, the company was fracturing. Rich tried to rein Thomas in privately, tried appealing to his sense of professionalism. You're letting emotion dictate business, Rich warned. Thomas didn't blink. You mean like you let emotion dictate abandoning mom at the altar? The father-son dynamic cracked under the pressure. Rich accused Thomas of undermining the brand. Thomas countered that Rich had already done that the moment he made a mockery of Taylor's value in front of the entire industry. You want to act like your decisions don't ripple through this company, through this family. Fine. But don't expect me to keep pretending your silence is noble. It's weak. That line cut deep. Too deep. Rich didn't respond. He walked out. In the following weeks, the brand entered a full-blown identity crisis. With Thomas blocking all lines associated with Brooke, inventory pipelines backed up. Retailers grew wary. Eric tried to play mediator, but even he couldn't ignore the tide of sentiment shifting in Thomas's favor. The buzz around the new Tridge-inspired designs was electric. Early sketches were leaked online and instantly went viral. Critics praised the energy, the modernized classics, the emotional depth in every line. Fashion bloggers dubbed it the Forester Renaissance. Internally, younger designers and staff began aligning with Thomas. Not because they hated Brooke, but because they were tired of the same narratives, tired of the cycles, tired of Ridge's indecision dictating the fate of everyone else's work. Thomas was offering something clear, grounded in a history they respected but pointing toward a future they could believe in. The board grew anxious. Shareholders demanded a resolution. Ridge's image, once uncheckable, was starting to crack in the public eye. He was no longer the stable visionary, he was the emotional liability. And the more he refused to take sides, the worse it got. The breaking point came during a private summit of department heads. Ridge tried to position himself as neutral, as the steady hand. But Thomas cut him off in front of everyone. You don't get to be neutral, he said. You left a woman at the altar and tried to walk back into this building like it didn't affect everyone else's lives. You treated Mom like a placeholder. And now you want to pretend this company isn't reflecting that chaos? You're the storm, Dad. Not me. Silence fell across the room. Then Thomas made his final move. If you can't choose Mom, then choose the company. Step back. Let me lead creative. Let me take Forrester forward. Or I'll walk and I'll take this entire movement with me. It was blackmail. But it was brilliant. Because he knew the numbers. Knew the press was already in his corner. Knew buyers were salivating over the new designs. And he knew Ridge's pride couldn't withstand another public fracture. Eric called a board vote behind closed doors. And for the first time in Forrester history, the family legacy wasn't just about Ridge anymore. It was about the son who had been kept in his father's shadow too long. The result: Thomas was granted creative control over a new division. Ridge reimagined a legacy line inspired by Taylor and Ridge's early fashion collaborations. A global rollout was greenlit. Brooke's influence was quietly reduced. Her lines moved into seasonal rotation instead of flagship collections. Ridge didn't fight it. He walked out of the boardroom that day without saying a word. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about business. It was about respect. And for the first time in decades, Thomas wasn't asking for it. He was taking it. And Taylor. She never raised her voice. Never demanded revenge. But she watched as her son did what Ridge never could. Draw a line in the sand. A new chapter had begun. And this time, the power didn't belong to Ridge. It belonged to the ones who had been left behind and who finally refused to stay there.